we have discovered that equipment, supplies, and notions can make your work easier. We've gained insights from successful businesswomen, gleaned useful tips for wholesale purchasing, and learned that health and safety are important issues for the sewing workroom. Now learn the efficient sewing methods used in industrial sewing from Margaret Islander. After the segment, she will be eager to answer your questions.
Hi there, and welcome to the Islander School of Fashion Arts. Have you ever wished that you could go through the back door of a factory and observe some of the wonderful techniques that would enable you to sew faster and cleaner and have the garment look more professional? And moreover, have you wished you could go home to your home machine and be able to use those same techniques? Well, I too had that desire many years ago, and through a very unusual opportunity, I was able to learn those techniques and to bring them to you today. Now, as I proceed through these techniques, I'm reminded of something that my mother always said. I had a habit of reading in some very strange positions, and she'd come into the living room and find me upside down in a chair reading a book, and her remark was always the same: position is everything in life. So I'd like you to follow and watch very carefully the position of my hands, because these methods have been scientifically researched. They've been done over and over again to make sure that you could understand why the fabric was acting as it was and how to compensate for what the machine was doing. So watch carefully on the position. Let's talk about the mechanism of the machine, because once we understand that, we know that we can turn the disadvantages, or what have seemed to be disadvantages, to our good. We can learn how to use those to help us. Now, first of all, the feed dogs on a machine are coming up and shoving the fabric back. The foot comes down on top and shoves the fabric toward you. So the simple logic tells you that if you start out at the first part of a seam and you don't use pins or basting or any good techniques, at the end of that seam you'll come out with the top layer ahead of the bottom layer. So let's show you how to compensate for that. To illustrate these facts, we have two strips that are 3 inches by 36 inches long. And what we're going to do is start out at the end of one of the strips and sew to the other end and have them come out even. Now, first of all, let's put our needle down first, about 2 stitches in from the cut edge. The reason for that being that, as I said, the foot is pushing the fabric toward you. And if you put the foot down first, by the time you have turned the wheel one rotation, you have already shoved the top layer ahead of the bottom one. Now, back tack to the edge, and we're going to take a 1/4 inch seam here, get a few stitches in, leave the needle down. Now watch what I'm going to do. I'm going to pick up the other end of these 2 strips together evenly, and I'm going to hold those out over my left shoulder, like this. Now, as soon as I have them even, I will grasp it at a convenient distance from the needle, with the thumb under and the fingers on top. Now that's an important point, because if you reverse it this way, you'll compound your problem. So the thumb is under, the fingers are on top, and then tip it this way. You see, you cause a greater strain on the lower layer, which is being caught by the feed dogs. All right, now with your left hand, which most people forget they have in sewing, it stays right in here, and you keep your fingers in a position such as you would to play a piano. Important, because they have to control those layers and keep them together. And it's there simply to control the fabric, to keep the 2 edges together, and this sort of thing. So the right hand is going to be doing most of the work. Now hold on to it until you get up close to it. Stop with the needle down. Once again, take hold of the ends and get them even. This becomes very automatic after a while. Now, thumb under, fingers on top, tip it up like this. Place the left hand in here in control. Stop with the needle down once again. Once again, stop with your needle down. Sewing should be fun. Make it that way. Once again. All right, we're coming out, and believe it or not, we're coming out even. And that was so much easier than having to pin and baste and have all that hardware around. Completely even. Now I'm going to ask you to take and cut this strip into some even 6-inch segments, and we're going to come back and do something really fun with that. Just cut them in. They don't have to be perfectly even, just some segments that we can use later. All right. Now to show you even clearer what your machine is doing, I'm going to take 2 more strips. And these strips are, again, 3 inches by 36 inches. So that if you're cutting some, you might try to use the same size we're using and see if you can do it, which we know you can, of course. Now let's take a scissors and cut about 1 inch off of one end of one of the strips. Okay? Now, I want to sew these 2 strips together so they're going to come out even, and let me show you what we have here. Believe it or not, you can get them to come out even. Now, which one of these would I put down against the feed dogs? You know by now. Of course, the longer one, so that the feed dogs will grab it and ease it in for you and help you. All right, so we'll start again at the end, and remember the needle down first. A couple of stitches from the end, put the foot down, back up, and come forward. Leave the needle down, and now we take the ends, bring them together, and of course we're going to have a big bow underneath here. Try to adjust it as evenly as you can, just like you do gathers when you're gathering a skirt. And then take just one segment of it and tip it up, just the way we did before, only give it a little bit more pressure on it. And sew up to your fingers. Not over them, only up to them. That causes problems. Needle down, pick it up from the end again. One time we did a banner to go across a highway, and of course we couldn't hold the end of it too well this way, so we marked it off every yard and did it in segments. So you can do any length you want this way. Okay. Readjust each time. You can almost notice from the side of the machine what it's doing. If you look, there's a ripple on the under strip of cloth. And you can see how it's easing it in for me. And we're almost home safe here. Now, do you see the edge here? How it's eased in for you, and that can be to your advantage in many cases. One of these is when you're sewing the back shoulder to the front shoulder. If you'll just put the back shoulder down against the machine, put the front shoulder on top of it, and sew it, and it will do the easing for you. There's many other places. For instance, if you've ripped out a piece and it softened the piece up and made it stretchier, just put the stretchy piece down on the bottom and sew them together, and the feed dogs will ease it back in for you. Now, the thing that you want to remember is that on the bottom, you want the longest, the slipperiest, the stretchiest, the most difficult to handle. Let the feed dogs help you. Now, let's take the 2 pieces that we cut apart. Remember, we cut the first strip into segments. And here we have our 2 pieces, and we can press our seams open. We don't eliminate any of the pressing. Now, throughout this session, I won't be mentioning much about pressing, but we always press. That's one of the most important parts of sewing. But for time purposes, we're doing that ahead of time. Now, when we go to cross seams, which is what we're going to do now, you know how they tend to slip on you and they move apart, you open it up and they're not matched up? Well, there are some tips that can help you a great deal on that. And they have to do with the action, again, of the feed dogs and of the foot that's pushing it toward you. Now, the first thing we do is to have the 2 seams crossed to begin with. That's a real help. Then, coming up to it, lower your needle into the fabric, first and begin stitching. Now as you get closer to the seam, using your left nail, give just a slight pressure to force the upper layer, maybe a thread, forward toward the needle. That way allowing the foot to come along and push it a little bit so that it will land right on top of the lower one. Now, you see? Your seam is crossed. This is also a great tip for plaids. When you're using plaid, all you have to do is to set the bar that you're trying to match of the plaid, take the top layer and set it approximately 1/8 of an inch ahead of the lower layer. Now that would be for a skirt weight woolen or a shirt weight woolen. If you have a coat weight plaid, then it might take 1/4 of an inch. But set the top layer toward the needle from you about 1/4 of an inch on a wool coating. And you can match up so much better than you can with pins. Now tell me, why are pins actually a disadvantage? And I know there are many answers coming out there. The most important one is that all of this action we've been talking about takes place whether or not there's a pin in that seam. All that happens is that when you come up to the pin, it either does one of two things. It forms a little pleat there if you sew over the pin, or you pull the pin, it will send the fabric on further and it won't be matched. And so really, if you can learn to sew for the most part without the pins, you are so much better off. Now let's throw ourselves a little curve. Have you ever had trouble with Peter Pan collars and curves where you had to stop, leave the needle down, pick up the foot, turn it, put the foot back down, and go around it step by step? I think perhaps I have something here that can help you on that method. First of all, I have designed this little thing that my students lovingly call the weirdo because of its shape, but it's worked very nicely to learn how to sew curves. Now if you notice there's an inside curve here and then it swings to an outside curve. On the inside curve there's not a whole lot of instruction I could give you. Now we'll start on the inside curve here, put the needle down, and there isn't too much to tell you about an inside curve. They're fairly simple. So we'll sew around to the other one. Now, as we come up on the other curve, I'm going to position my hands, and I will exaggerate a little bit for you. But you see how I'm fanning my hands out like this, and there's going to be just ever so slight a pressure pulling away from the needle on the index finger. And this is to counteract the natural tendency to force material into the needle. All right, now, you don't even need two hands for this one. All right, so we'll sew around this curve. And what we'll do is we will fan our hand and control it going into the needle and just move the wrist around, do you see? Now when you get to where you need to reposition it, once again, and what I'm doing is this, just sort of fanning it in like that, okay? Now this piece was designed so that you could use it as a sample and you could turn and come all the way around here again and then start and use this previous stitching as your guide and go all the way around inside of it and keep on going. So it makes a wonderful practice piece. Now let's talk about some different curves here. Put this one aside. Do you recognize this little guy? That's the kind of a pocket that if you have two on a jacket, you hope that they'll at least look like cousins if they don't look like brothers. And it's so hard to get them to look alike. But I think perhaps this will help you a little bit. It's a trick we call crimping. Now it is called various different names. It's something that's been in use for a long time. But basically it's forcing more fabric into each stitch than it normally would have. What we do is we start doing a stitching ahead of time before we turn the edge of the pocket. And we'll do this just inside the seam allowance, a little less than the seam allowance. Starting where it's still straight but it's heading for a curve. We put the needle down, the foot. Now watch the position I put my hands in. This is what we call crimping. It's called other things in various classes, but what it amounts to is to force more fabric into each stitch. Now take the index finger of your right hand Now it needs to be in this position, not this position. It won't work that way. You've got to have it with the pad against the back of the foot, and it has to be your right hand in order to allow your left hand to guide the fabric into the needle. Now, start sewing just inside the seam allowance and take the attitude that I'm not going to let that material come through. I'm going to stand back there and keep it from going through. It will, of course, go through, but it'll wrinkle it up. Now, when you get around the curve, leave the needle down. You can pick up the foot to release some of the fullness. And once again, you can come across a little further toward the other curve. Then, now the right hand with the pad of the index finger against the back of your foot. This one takes a little bit of practice to perfect it, but it's worth its weight in gold. Now, none of you tidy housewives out there, the tendency is to straighten out that mess. And that's the last thing you want to do, because you want that to help you. And I find no matter how many times I say that, when you haven't been able to do it, if I watch the student, they've been doing this and straightening it all out. So just leave it all crimped up like that. Okay, trim it off. Okay, now watch what I do. We won't take the time here to press it, but I'll show you what we do before pressing. You see how that fits right in on a nice curve there? You see? You look from this side, and you see the perfect curve you get? Now just press the pockets and put them on and smile. Actually, recently we have found another way to use this tip that the classes are really enjoying, since shirts are so much in fashion, and that is on the split hem of a shirt. This is often a very difficult place to get around and to top stitch accurately, but just watch. Once again, we're going to crimp, but we don't need to do it around the flat parts of the shirt. We'll just do it when we come up to these curves, and we'll do this ahead of folding up the hem. Do the same method, pad of the index finger against the back of the foot. If you have to stop, leave the needle down, pick up the foot, let some of it go. Okay. Don't smooth it out. If you get tidy, you'll ruin it. Now, press it like this, and then from the right side, top stitch it. Why from the right side? Because you want your feed dogs to help you ease in the excess. And you see what a nice shirt tail hem you'll have there? That's a great one. We do have one more quick little tip for you that I think you're going to enjoy, and that is a flat felled seam. You remember all the work that there used to be in flat felled seams, where you'd sew it once and then you'd trim it off and then you'd fold it over and press it, and then it wouldn't turn out looking right. Well, the method that I have here is not the one used in the big industries, because they have specialized equipment which sews it all in one operation. But it is used by a lot of smaller factories and by factories which only occasionally use a flat felled seam for trim. It's really quite simple. You have your fabrics together with wrong sides together instead of the usual right sides together. You take the top piece and set it back a little bit, over 1/4 of an inch from the under piece, just a hair over. Now remember not to sew anything until you have folded something, and you'll be safe, because there is an older tip that did it by sewing first. Now watch this one. This is different. You fold the extension over the lower piece, and now we are going to sew 1/4 of an inch from the edge, which should land the stitching almost on the raw edge. Use the side of your foot as your gauge for your 1/4 inch, and you'll be all right, because it must be even. It doesn't matter even if it missed a little on the raw edge. It's important to keep it 1/4 from the fold. Now what I do to make a sample, and I think it'd be fun for you to make a notebook with samples of all of these things, is that I come down part way with this step so that I still have it open where I can see what I've done. Now, let's stop right there, for instance. Clip. Now, watch this carefully because to me it's still sheer magic. So you see here was where you sewed. Pick it up and, of course, press it over this way. See, now do that once more. Just have it standing up and press the fold edge over. Now, I'll start up a little further so that we leave our sample in 3 stages and stitch right on the edge. Now you see there's been no cutting or trimming or special folding or pressing, and you have a beautiful flat felt seam. I have just really enjoyed having you here to visit with us at the Islander School of Fashion Arts today. There are so many more techniques, just exciting tips, and what I call my desperation techniques that I would love to share with you, but they're going to have to wait for future tapes. In the meantime, practice these techniques, use them, and look at your sewing as an art form. Now go do something creative. You can, you know.
The Alabama Cooperative Extension Service, meeting the challenges for tomorrow.